Good afternoon to everybody. It's 4 o'clock here in Amsterdam, so let's get started. With our fourth webinar by now, we did in these strange Corona times. I hope you're all doing well and you're all healthy. We started this as also because many of us are at home and perhaps interested in communicating about, in our case, WFM. So this is, we thought this might be an opportunity to organize these webinars. And it's also an opportunity for many people from to reach out to a larger audience, an international audience. Of course, we're an international company with customers in different places around Europe and also outside of Europe. But certainly these times make it even more easy to reach out internationally. So thanks for joining. Today, the first three webinars were kind of technical. The first one was on forecasting, the second on Erlang, the third on chat scheduling. And this, but based on some discussions we had the last 2 weeks, also with some of the people who are present right now, we had a talk with some people who are working for the United Nations for their call center, and also other people, also from Rabo gave us, told us, hey, how about the human factor in workforce management? If you have a small call center, of course, you know the people, you can talk to the people. There is this human touch to the planning, and when you scale up and when you go to tooling, do you lose this this human touch? Or what can be done perhaps to keep this human touch? What is this human touch? So that is really today's subject. So a bit different in two ways, less technical, but also going a bit beyond regular workforce management. So as I said, small call centers, forecasting and scheduling is very often done by hand. Of course, up to a certain scale, that becomes very hard that you want to automate. And especially when you talk about employee satisfactions, automation, there's a risk that you lose this human touch, that you take the personal preferences into account. So that is what we will be talking about today. Again, not in a very technical way, but more in, well, philosophical is perhaps not the word, but in a somewhat more abstract way. And so the question is it either man or machine, or can we somehow combine these two and come up with a solution that works for a larger scale, but still has this human touch? And before I do so, I want to make a parallel with what is going on, because we all see around us new developments in artificial intelligence, and especially in the area of machine learning. So what is going on there, and do we see any parallels with W, and perhaps can we learn from what's happening over there? Yeah, so first I'm going to talk a little bit about what is the situation in artificial intelligence, what is going on, and then the relation to workforce management, and what are the lessons to learn, and what can we learn from that for workforce management. Okay, so let's first look at what are we good at. When I talk about men, of course, men and women, and talking about we as humans, what are we good at? Yes, we are very good in very quickly decision-making in very complex environments. And without realizing, we do that, of course, every day. When you walk in the street, when you participate in the traffic, when you talk to other people, and you have to make a decision what to do, sometimes very small decisions, sometimes important decisions. Yes, and then I'm not talking only about the business decisions that we make that have perhaps a big impact on other people, but every day we are involved with very complex environments that we perceive through our ears, eyes, and that we have to deal with. Computers have their own things they are good at, and I would like to call it, and I hope that becomes clear in a second, high-dimensional decision-making, but usually in relatively simple environments. Yes, and let me try to make this clear by a couple of examples. Yes, so on one hand, on the horizontal axis, you see the complexity of the environment. And so and on the vertical axis, the dimensionality. And let's look at certain things that computer scientists, people specialized in artificial intelligence, are looking at. So let's look at a simple game such as tic-tac-toe. In Dutch, bootkaas en eieren, you all know it. It's a simple 3x3 square, simple to solve. So the environment is very simple, yeah? Some simple rules. It's simple to see if somebody has one, who has one. Very simple, but also low dimensionality. It's a 3x3 square, only crosses and circles on it, or nothing. So that's relatively simple. Yeah. So low dimensionality, low complexity. Human can solve it easily. Computer can solve it easily. Now a much more difficult problem. Let's go to chess. Yes, of course the rules are a bit more different. You have different pieces on the board, but what definitely makes chess much more complicated is the fact that the board is much larger. Yeah, it's an 8x8 board. So if you think, and of course mathematicians are very quick at that, but if you think of the number of possible situations on the board, that's much higher. Yes, so chess is really a challenging problem, but something that computers are good at. These are high-dimensional problems, so you need fast computers, lots of computations, and computers are fast, can calculate extremely fast. We all, perhaps you have heard of Moore's law, but computers get faster and faster every year. So chess is a problem that has been challenging, but has well been solved. And somewhere already 20 years ago, the world champion at that time, Kasparov, has been beaten by a computer program. So chess is something that is typical where computers are good at. The rules are simple, or relatively. You can write them down. You can write them down on one or two pieces of paper. These are the rules, but then the complexity in terms of the dimensionality is very high. It's a high-dimensional problem, lots of possibilities, and the computer solves it by lots of number crunching. And the most recent advancement, which is a big achievement over the last couple of years, was Go. Now you would say, hey, why took it more time to solve Go than chess? Yes, and Go is simpler. There are only two types of pieces. You have black and white stones. But the thing with Go is the board is not 8x8, but it's bigger. Usually, I think it's 19x19. It's a much bigger board to play on. That makes the dimensionality a lot higher, makes it computationally more difficult. So the rules are a bit simpler than chess, but because of the dimensionality, that's more difficult. But that has also been solved. So these three games and lots of other games, typically where computers are good at, because in games the rules are clearly specified. So that's a perfect area for a computer. But if you go to real life, that's more difficult. For example, image recognition is much more difficult for a computer. Of course, there are impressive advances over the last 10, 20 years, but still, if you see that a computer can beat the world champion in Go, but still does very stupid things when it comes to image recognition, that is really a surprising difference. And why is that? Because there are so many different types of images, things that the computer is not even aware of, if you may use such a term for a computer. But it's way less clear what types of images you can present to a computer. So the rules of the game, the complexity of the environment is much larger. I'm a bit hard to explain this, but I hope it gets clear what the crucial difference is. And if you look, for example, at car driving, yes, then you also have more dimensionality, you have more possibilities, and then more consequence. So it's a bit like chess. If I turn right, or if I accelerate a bit, then that has consequence for the future. Many different possibilities. So there is a higher dimensionality, but you run into the same problems of a complex environment. Yes, so that is typical car driving. So therefore, also in car driving, indeed, much still impressive advances that have been made over the last 5 to 10 years. But actually, as we are, I guess, all aware of, people thought 10 years ago that by now we would all be driving in automatic cars, and that's definitely not the case. And as time progresses, actually, the time until automatic driving is pushed forward. So we are not there yet. Okay, to make this example even a little bit clearer, perhaps you've seen these pictures. There are lots of fun pictures about cats and dogs. And here, recently, this is about image recognition. What you see are 4 pictures of, let's say, 3 black dots on a well, what is it? A yellowish background. And what is it? Is it a dog or is it a muffin with pieces of chocolate in it? Yes. So, of course, as a human, you immediately see what it is. As a computer, that's what's the fun of it. It's hard to recognize. And actually, the computer, different tests have made very, very stupid mistakes in recognizing images. On the other hand, here is an example, and I don't know if you know this. These are drawings. Perhaps I should have looked up the drawer of this, but these are drawings that you can buy, books with these drawings. And there's this figure, Waldo in English, and he is always dressed the same. But then you have a huge image of a stadium or the beach or a festival, things that we do not do right now, actually. So on today's beach, he would be easier to find. But Waldo is somewhere in the audience, and you have to look for Waldo. So you would say that's easy because he is dressed all the same, but you really have to look over the whole image. So that's a lot of work. So, and I've seen these books a couple of years ago already, and it's surprising how hard it is to find Waldo on a beach like this. Yes, it can really frustrating. It can take you quite some time before you find it. For a computer, this is an extremely easy job. Yes, it has to this image of Waldo. It has to a little bit modify, turned a bit, but that's an easy job for a computer. Yeah. So I hope it's clear where computers are good at and what men are good at. But now you say, oh, this is all nice, and I understand it. But now we have all these recent advancements about artificial intelligence. And so isn't artificial intelligence changing this whole situation? Yeah, because artificial intelligence, that's about human intelligence in a computer. Yeah. So artificial intelligence is indeed, what is the definition of artificial intelligence? That is the computer doing tasks, the human tasks that are considered to be difficult. Yes. So then the computer gets some form of human intelligence, and then it should be able to do the same things as humans are doing. And indeed, the computer is successful at some of these tasks, and especially, and that is the big difference, the computer is especially successful at these tasks, and that holds also for artificial intelligence. So that doesn't change the whole situation. Also in artificial intelligence, the successes are there in these situations where you have where the rules are clear and this high dimensionality. Yeah, and when you move to this real world, as you perhaps I should state it that way, where you have these complex environments, then the situation is different. And why is that? That is actually because these programs have with these AI technology in it, they do not think as humans think. Yeah? They can do certain human tasks in a very successful way, but the way they solve these problems is very different. The way a Go computer plays Go is very different. It follows the same rules as a human, but it follows a different type of reasoning. Yes, so they think, between quotes, of course, because they think different. They do not think as we think. So perhaps we shouldn't call this thinking. Yeah, and actually. A lot of these AI, it is in a certain way, of course, there are big advancements in AI and new technology, but it's not that it's completely different from what has been there over the last tens of years. For example, machine learning that lots of people are talking about. Well, many of you followed perhaps an introductory course in statistics, then you have linear regression. So machine learning, you might say, that's non-linear regression, but then having lots of data at your disposition. So if you have lots of data, then you can fit models with lots of parameters, and that is basically what machine learning does. Very successful in many areas, and it's important that we invest a lot of money in making these methods work, but it is, in a way, if you look at it, what it does, it is using lots of data and doing nonlinear regression. And in this technology, for example, image recognition and also in automated driving, people are using artificial neural networks. Lots of research going into it, big advancements. But you should realize that these artificial neural networks, they were initially perhaps inspired by how the human brain works. But if you look at it, what it is, it's really different from a real neuron that is in your head. Yeah? So they are adapted, and they became successful when they made certain adaptations that are really different from what is happening in the human brain. So successful methods, especially successful when the rule set is clear and based on different ways of thinking or reasoning than humans use. Yeah? So in a way, of course, we talk about machine learning, we talk about artificial intelligence. So we like to use these human analogs, but it's a bit misleading because it's not learning as we learn. It's parameter estimation, it's artificial intelligence. Well, it's not human intelligence, that's for sure. So it's not mimicking human intelligence. Yeah. Okay, so that is setting a bit the stage. How I see artificial intelligence and things are going on, where AI is good at, where current technology is good at. And now let's move on to workforce management. Yes. So the thing is that if you look at workforce management, actually the environment, certainly parts of the environment, are pretty complicated. Yeah. If you think about labor rules, yes, and how they sometimes can partially conflict each other. And on top of that, if you think about personal preferences of agents, do they prefer a certain shift or a different shift, or do they like to work at certain times? Do they like to have free time? There are all kinds of different preferences of agents that are somewhat hard to quantify or to put in the rule. It makes that the workforce management is actually an environment in which the rules are not that simple or clear. Yeah, and think also about fairness between agents. Yes, if they work on certain times that are not preferable, or if one agent has to do considerably more work than another agent, at these type of fairness rules. If you think about all that, that makes workforce management a complicated environment. And then the question is, of course, okay, you can as a human, you can take these personal preferences. If you have a small call center, you can take the personal preferences as a planner and the preferences of a relatively small group of agents into account. If you increase size, how can you still schedule without losing this human touch, without losing this understanding of the environment? Yeah? And if you would put it into the graph that I just showed you, then perhaps workforce management in a small call center has a low dimensionality. It's still relatively simple. There are things, computing service levels, also in a small call center, under a given schedule is not that easy, so it has a certain complexity, but perhaps costs are relatively low, it's perhaps not that important, but the environment is pretty complex. Yeah. Now, if you increase the size, then the scheduling puzzle that a scheduling tool has to solve becomes pretty complicated. And perhaps not more complicated than solving chess, I don't know. So you should see this a bit relatively. But now you run into a problem that both has a complex environment, so that humans are good in solving it, and that both has, well, a pretty high dimensionality, making that to really understand it, that you actually need a computer to solve it, that it's too, the dimensionality is too high for a human to answer questions such as, is this a good service level, if this agent swaps shift with that agent, but they have different skills, what are the consequences? Yes, these types of questions. Yeah. So let's dive a bit deeper into this human touch. And for that, I put here in this graph the goals of workforce management. So as I see it, what are the goals of workforce management? Now, of course, and I look perhaps a bit at a call center here as a cost center. You can have different views on that, but for the sake of this presentation, I think this is might be a good representation. So what are the WFM goals? Of course, you want to, you are there to help your customers. So you want to reach a certain service level. And I'm talking really about workforce management, not so much about quality of the calls, but really on the workforce management goals. So on one hand, you want to reach a good service level. Yeah, you want to be reachable by your customers in a good way. On the other hand, of course, you don't want to do this for any cost. So somehow you should control your costs. Yeah, but then you do this by you're having agents to do this, and agent satisfaction is of course a very important thing, because you want to keep your good agents, because they are delivering the quality that you want. So agent satisfaction, they should be satisfied with your schedule. So these are the 3 WFM goals. Now, in general, the cost of a certain schedule is not that hard to calculate. How many hours do you hire certain agents? And of course, there are different variants of that, but that is usually not the hardest part of it. Yes? The harder parts are, of course, the service level and the agent satisfaction. And the thing is that to compute service level, yes, given a certain schedule, these are the methods that I've been discussing the last week. Think about, even in a multi-scale, multi-channel environment, you have simulation methods, you have all kinds of methods to compute this service level. So that's relatively easy for a computer. But it is hard, it's actually hard for a human. Yeah, because for a human, there's something like, let's say, a domino effect. If one agent is perhaps changing the time he or she works, then that has consequences for the skills he or she has. But another agent who has overlapping skills might also go do something else. So one small change might have a whole domino effect of changes. Yeah? So service level computations are typically hard for a human and easy for a computer. The agent satisfaction part, that really has to do with the complexity of the environment. Yeah? So that is hard for computers. Things like fairness rules, things like what are the personal preferences, how to differentiate between, so one aspect, if you change the schedule, you might improve the schedule for on one aspect. Perhaps the hours become better for an agent, but on the other hand, the fairness decreases. How to do this type of trade-off? That is, yeah, I see a remark by somebody. Her brain is essentially an organic computer. Yeah, so what you say, Dane, it makes sense as a remark, but if you look at the current state of the art of the computers, if you look at current achievement, I'm not saying that a computer cannot, I mean, I cannot predict what's going to happen in the future. Yeah, so I do not say that I don't believe that we can make such that we can really duplicate, let's say, the brain, and that's of course an interesting philosophical question, but it's but it is we are not there. And when you look at the computers nowadays, they are definitely working in a different way. But it's an interesting philosophical question, of course, whether at some point computers will reach what we would call intelligence. Yes? That if you look at how, and that's the point I was trying to make, if you look at how, let's say, a game of chess is being solved by a computer, that's really different than how a human is playing chess. Okay, so what is this human touch? Yes, yeah. So indeed, that things might be very, very different. But okay, let's move on and let's continue with what is actually the human touch? So is it the fact that that there's really a human involved in the process, or does it have more to do with taking care of being heard? Let's say being empathic to the issues and the preferences to the agent. Yeah? And if you make a decision, does the agent understand why he or she has to work at a certain time, at perhaps a non-preferred time? Yeah? And these type of things still are, well, quite difficult for computers. Yes, and that is, and we call this perhaps a human touch because we see that the computer has problems doing it. Yeah. So what is the solution that you see nowadays in many situations? And that's also in artificial intelligence, a whole discussion about whether computers will replace humans or whether man and machine will work together. Yeah, for the moment, I think there is, most people see more of a symbiosis than computers replacing humans. Yeah? So, and two examples of symbiosis that you see is that when we work together, when you're driving without realizing it nowadays, you perhaps type in the destination in your navigation software and it leads you the way. Yes, or a doctor being helped by all kinds of devices that help him or her set the diagnosis. Yeah? And at the same time, we should realize that this is part of a process where actually the role of the computer is getting bigger and bigger. Yes, when most of us were young, we still had like paper maps to find our way. Then 10, 15 years ago, we moved to this great software, first in our TomTom, nowadays simply in our smartphone or built into our computer. And perhaps in 10, 15 years, who knows, hard to predict, we will use autonomous driving. Similarly, in healthcare, a few centuries ago, there were very primitive forms of medical treatments, and not at all statistically based. Then we learned statistics, then we learned all kinds of imaging techniques, and nowadays even the computer can help us do the diagnosis. Yes, and in this case, it's the computer that here sees lungs being infected by the new virus. And of course, we see applications where computers count the number of tumor cells, where they can see fractures in bones that are sometimes missed by doctors. So we see that the computer is helping the doctor or the driver in getting his or her goals out. Yeah? So on one hand, we see this symbiosis, and on the other hand, we see that the role of the machine and the computer is getting bigger. If we want this symbiosis in WFM, our tooling should be ready for this. Yes. So if we have black box tooling, yes, then we cannot do anything with that. Yeah. If we want to interpret our forecast, and if we want to be able to adapt the forecast because we have information that the forecast, the computer didn't have. If we have information about a new virus, if we have information about the marketing action that was not used in the forecast, then of course we have to understand the forecast and the different components to be able to adapt it. Yeah? So a forecast should always be, let's say, a white box and not a black box, so that we can adapt it ourselves. Yes. Yeah. And also, if you have different alternatives that you are consider, then it's not up to the computer to make always the decision, but it should be possible that the computer evaluates different alternatives. So it is not about decision making by a black box, but it's decision support by a white box that gives the consequences of the different actions. So if an agent wants to change shift for some reason, then you might ask, then it should have tooling, because that is the difficult part. So what are the consequences of such a change on, let's say, the surface level? So that is how things, if you want to have this symbiosis, the computer should help you make the decisions and should not make the decisions for you. And that means that it's not just about making the decision, no, giving the reasons, giving the consequences of alternatives, etc. Yeah? So that is how I think workforce management tooling should be built, and what's in it for the future. Yes. So as you saw, when you think about driving, slowly the role of the machine is increasing. So how about WFM? Yeah. Well, one of the things that I see happening, and one of the things we are working on, is that we want to simplify the use of the tooling. Yes, that, for example, you do need to configure the tooling yourself, that you do not, that the tool learns that it automatically configures itself, that the tool learns what the best configuration is. For example, that you do not have to enter the outlier or the holidays, but that it automatically detects it. And certainly in the situation of holidays, that is that it can be done, because the holiday calendars are also known. Think also about preference of agents. One agent prefers a certain shift over the other, but another agent might have different preferences. You can, of course, ask agents, what do you prefer, and somehow build this in your algorithms. That is a difficult job with a lot of iterations before you can translate the preferences into certain parameters. Yes, but what you now also see is that you can abstract new areas of machine learning where you can learn the goals by the preferences, by the actions of the people. So if people, for example, rate a schedule, or if people say, hey, I like this schedule, then that has certain consequences for, well, how you should weigh different aspects of schedules. Yeah. So if you do it in such a way, yes, and perhaps I'm the one here using, let's say, human properties for computer tooling, but then I think a WM tool becomes empathic. Yeah, it's a rational agent, it's a decision-making entity, but that has a certain, well, that people will experience as empathic. Yes, and people do not always, and there's lots of experience in healthcare and in social media with that. People do not necessarily need a human at the other side, but things like empathy, you can build it in tooling. Yes, and people want to, then they want to be felt understood and not necessarily being answered by a human person. And I think also one of the future, one way that we will see is that we will put more and more of these rules, and some of these rules are really quite complicated. If you think, for example, about fairness rules, what is fair between agents, all these different preferences that are different from agents to agent, but the system will learn more rules. So here on the left, you have, say, a black box a white box that covers a number of rules, but some of these rules are outside of the tooling. So that is part of the decision support to take these rules into account when coming to, say, the final schedule. Yeah, but the more rules you implement you put in your tooling, the less human interaction you need, and still have, let's say, empathic schedules, if I'm allowed to coin this term. And let's talk about some other. I have one slide on some other things that we see happening nowadays. One thing, and that came also up in a blog on workforce management by Doug Custerton, and he said something about the gig economy. Yeah. So what's that? Well, you see more and more people in all kinds of areas being self-employed. And in the situation of a call center, you might think of people mostly working from home and being self-employed and working shorter interval and not having to deal with all kinds of labor regulations. Yes, the idea, of course, is on one side that is less costly for the call center. Yeah, the question is if that is really the case. There are all kinds of additional insurance costs, etc., that have to be dealt with by the employee in this situation, and perhaps these are actually hidden costs. Yes, and perhaps that's what we see happening, because those self-employed people typically in this situation right now in the virus are often in a difficult situation. So I don't know if that is the way as a society we want to go, but I think it's an interesting question. Is this really a better situation? And if this is where we are going, and perhaps only partly, what would that employ? What are the consequences for workforce management? Yeah, and in such a situation, of course, you cannot tell to somebody, "Hey, this is your schedule," because people are self-employed and have more. They have more authorization to decide on their own working hours. Yeah? And perhaps they can even do that at a very short notice and say, okay, these are the hours that I'm working, but these are hours I don't want to touch upon. So you have less control on that. Otherwise, there are less rules to stick to. Yeah? So to incentivize them to work at the times that you need them to work, yes, you have to give a financial incentive. Yeah? So how I see, if we are going in that direction, then I see certain parallels to airline pricing. Yes, to airline pricing, you see that depending on the hours, of course, capacity is usually fixed, but demand is different. Yeah, so here it's the same. Here, actually, the required capacity of agents changes per hour. That's based on your forecast, but then also the preferences of the agents are different. Yeah, so how to incentivize agents to work at the times that you need them. Yeah, so I see certain parallels to airline pricing, where you say, okay, this hour, then few people like to work, but many people call. So people working at that time, that they really earn more than those people working at, let's say, morning hours. When many people are available and lots of agents like to work. Yeah? So this I see here great challenges. I don't know if this is a good model, if we want to go there as a society, but I definitely think there are some very interesting scheduling challenges over here. Also, something that we do see happening at a certain scale is self-scheduling. Yes. So I hope from what I discussed, you see the risks of that, because as I try to explain, really understanding workforce management, understanding the consequences of certain decisions about shifts on service level. I mean, these are really very difficult, hard to compute. So these are not easy. So if you have to schedule yourself or as a team, you should have the consequences of that available, because otherwise you might make decisions that are good for the agent satisfaction, but on the other hand, it will lead to bad service level. So apart from the question if it is very efficient, and I think in general it is not cost-wise, I do think that you really need good decision support. You really need good WFM tooling to be able to do that. Situations is different if you handle, for example, back office tasks, but I do think that it's if you want to do this, that you really have to make sure that those who are scheduling themselves, those teams, that they are really that they give the agent with the right tooling to see their consequences. So in that sense, this is also, I think, a very interesting phenomena that's going on, but it should be implemented, of course, in the right way. With then you should empower the agent also with the possibility to understand the consequences of the schedule decisions. Okay. Okay, so I'm going towards the end of this webinar. So what I think are the takeaways of this webinar? I think what we have right now, and good tooling gives you this symbiosis. And I should definitely, if ever you are considering getting, for example, forecasting software, never take a black box. Even if the best algorithm is inside, it should always be a white box approach, so that you can interact with what you get and add those things that are outside of those rules that were taken by this forecasting application, that you can add your own intelligence and the own things you know from the environment you can add to that. So it should be very careful about a black box approaches, even if the best algorithm possible is in it. On the other hand, you see that these tooling gets much and much smarter. Yes, and these are also the things that we try to do, and put things like events in it, automate all kinds of parameter. The parameter settings, etc., to make it as simple as possible. And one of the people in the audience coined the term the one-button forecast, which I think is indeed the goal, and that we're getting pretty close to that. And the same holds at some point for one-button scheduling, taking all these personal preferences in the right way into account. And of course, showing consequences of decisions. That's what I said, no black boxes. Now, the good news is there's lots of research also going into that, and also people in the AI who are first focused on really getting the best forecast, now understand that you also have to explain why. Why do you hire somebody? Why do you think that is a certain, it's a cat or a dog? Or why does this system tell you that a certain sentence is automatically given to somebody? These things are happening, and there's more and more emphasis on this, on getting the explanation. So that is. So that is what is called explainable AI, and I think this is something that is also extremely relevant to workforce management. And I really think, and again, I'm mentioning this term another time, I really think that the agent should feel that the workforce management tooling is empathic, in the sense that it really understands the wishes and the preferences and of the agents. And I think we're moving towards that situation. So that is what I see on the horizon, where we're getting it. Okay, that is what I wanted to talk about. So as I said in the beginning, a not so technical, a bit more general subject. So I hope that inspired you and gave you certain ideas on how workforce management should be, or where we should go, or what you should pay attention to. Next week on Friday, same time, we're going to have another webinar. The subject is still to be determined, and I am like the most senior person here at CCmath, but we have a lot of other younger but equally smart people here with a mathematical background, so who have know a lot about workforce management. So we might have another speaker. We'll let you know in a couple of days. If you have suggestions for a subject, please let us know. Of course, we talk also to people. We had a couple of calls, and then one of these calls 10 days ago also inspires us to take this subject. And of course, there is room for questions. You can put them in the in the chat, and I see a couple of chat messages. Oh, they're from Wout. So please, if you have any questions, you can of course speak up or put it in the chat. Or any remarks that you want to make, or you want to share your ideas, please go ahead. It was below. What kind of rough time? True and okay, yeah. Yeah, so the question is, what kind of rough time frame do you see? And one of the things we do at CCmath is forecasting. And one of the things you learn when you do forecasting, especially long-term forecasting, is that it's very hard. Yes, and the risk of making a long-term, let's say a long-term forecast, is really saying something completely stupid, like what people did when they said in 5 years' time we'll all be having autonomous cars, or when Watson somewhere in the 50s said that the worldwide demand for computers would be no more than 5 in the decades to come. Yes, but I do think that yeah, what is it's always a feeling what is a truly empathic workforce management, but I think we should get there somewhere in the next couple of years. Yeah, and the steps and phases that I see in such a development process, yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that you need is, so what we try to build workforce management. Hey, on one side, you need to have an understanding of this workforce management, but on the other side, you need to have the tooling that kind of supports that. Yeah, and the back end, let's say, the computation. So it's really a combination of both. But I think we should definitely, and we are definitely making progress, and somewhere in the next couple of years we should be there. Yeah. And then the question is, what is the amount of work of? Well, one of the problems, one of the problems with machine learning, suppose that you want to somehow abstract from the preferred schedules from agents, you want to abstract what are their preferences. And one of the problems with machine learning is indeed you need lots of data. Yes, and so one of the and often it takes quite some time to get this data. So learning rates in many algorithms are still a bit slow. Yeah, and that is one of the things that's hindering AI. How quickly these algorithms will get better. Yeah, so it's hard to make a good. Well, it's hard to make forecast on that point. I definitely agree that you need perhaps not big data, but you need lots of data on agent preferences. Yeah, so it might even be an interesting, let's say, scientific experiment to set this up. Yes, to give agents lots of different schedules and then tell them, okay, give your preferences, and then see if we can abstract their underlying preferences from that. Yeah, I see a question by Mark. In the gig economy, how do we treat yeah. Yeah, knowledge bases, of course. My interesting question, Mark. My specialization is, of course, workforce management. But all the data handling and a lot of these things touch on things like knowledge bases. So they're not completely separated. That's an interesting question. Yeah. So how do you, in such a situation, how do you do agent certification, and how do you make sure they have the right knowledge to handle that? Yeah. Of course, knowledge bases get better and better, so the learning curve is getting steeper and steeper, or you can learn quicker, but it is still something. It's not the case that any agent can do anything. That's definitely not the case. You still need this learning. No. Are there, yeah, still no flying cars? That's definitely the case. Yeah, and I agree, Gaetano, that we still have a long way to go. One of the things about AI is that every couple of decades, people have huge expectations about AI, and they do not always become reality, or it takes sometimes longer than you expect. Maarten. Yeah. I agree. Maarten says Facebook is able to determine people the sexual orientation. Yeah, with pretty high accuracy, but they use lots of lots of data for that. Yeah, that's true. I don't know. We can test it. Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, I hope you found this interesting. Of course, it's as I said, it's a bit different than a very technical presentation, but I hope you like that as well. We will the other webinars. If you haven't followed them all, you want to look them back. They're on the you can find them on YouTube, and Wout can give you the link, and he will send the link also of this one with the video. Thanks for your attention, and if you have any questions, you know where you can reach us. If you have any suggestions for a future webinar, let us know as well. Thanks, Nuria, for suggesting this topic, and stay safe, have a nice weekend, and hope to see you, many of you, next week. Bye-bye. And the webinars are on ccmath.com. There's a link on the website. Bye-bye.